It has long been established in anthropology that if you wanted to moralize people individually and collectively, the way that you do it is not through one big blast, but by small little everyday things that affect them in their everyday lives. You make it seem legitimate, you make it seem as if it's necessary, you make it seem as if they're obliged to do it. That is the mask scam. When in August of 2020, it was announced that masks were mandatory, I put that in inverted commas, I was aware at that time that that was something I would go to prison for. And people would say, oh, well, isn't it minor? And what would you go, would you not go to prison for something more important? But I reiterate the first remark. In other words, if you wanted to moralize people, you don't do it in big ways. You do it in small ways. But those small ways affect their everyday living. So, in this case, you can't go to a food shop, ostensibly, unless you're wearing a mask. It was a disgraceful article in today's Irish Times, even by their low standards. This article today by Sean Moncrief, no less, was talking about anti-maskers. It's not the Irish Times if you don't go for 4 or 5 weeks without some kind of propaganda against those who are not wearing masks. And Moncrief describes travelling on the Dart, and there were 2 men who were not wearing masks talking about, how everybody is sheep, and they're talking in loud voices. Apparently we're not allowed to talk in loud voices on the Dart, according to Sean Moncrief. Talking in loud voices about not wearing masks and why they felt that it was a scam and such like. Now, Moncrief then says he moved to another carriage, which is his right. And then he said when he left the train, he noticed that one of the men had lit up a cigarette on the train. I could use different types of language here, but I'll just say that I'm sceptical of that claim. I think that's probably the most polite way to put it. And there are reasons why I'm sceptical of that claim. It's because Irish Rail and Dublin Bus and those other units of CIE have a very strict no-tolerance policy towards smoking on public transport, and that's been in place for 20 years. I would imagine that the Dart at this stage probably has smoke detectors. It would also have CCTV. I mean, that's a fact. It does have CCTV. So the driver would have seen that there was a cigarette lit on the train. The driver would have pulled in and would have waited for that person either to put it out, get off the train, or for the guards to arrive. The Gardaí for our non-Irish listeners. So I'm sceptical of that. But I'm sceptical of a lot of things that are coming out in RTE and the mainstream media at the moment, the Irish Times. Moncrief does not make any reference to people who might, at least in their own heads, have a legitimate reason for not wearing a mask. He doesn't in any way attempt to speculate about the background of those 2 men and why they're not wearing a mask. So there's a lot of assumptions made in Mr. Moncrief's article. I was shopping today, Saturday, and when I was in the supermarket I saw another man not wearing a mask, and he had a lanyard round him saying, "Please respect my hidden disability," which means that I cannot wear a mask. That saddened me. It saddens me that that man cannot feel he can walk around a supermarket to buy food in a free society, in a republic like ours, without having to apologise for himself in that way. Please respect my hidden disability. What it also implies to me, and I'm only drawing an inference from this, it implies that that man was approached by people who berated him or scolded him in some way for not wearing a mask. I consider that man wearing that lanyard to be a very serious infringement of his civil liberties. He should not have to explain his disability to anyone. And this is the criterion I use when somebody attempts to scold me in the supermarket or elsewhere for not wearing a mask. This happened yesterday, actually, when I was going in. I went in, a woman, middle-aged to elderly woman, said to me, "Where's your mask?" I said, "Are you a member of staff?" I'm just asking, I said, I'm asking you, are you a member of staff? Oh, sorry, there's no need to be like that. I said, when you close your mouth and don't approach me, then there's no need to be like that. I'm sorry I came near you. Good, I said. There's a country expression, I said, a closed mouth catches no flies. I said, and I suggest that you bear that in mind. I won't approach you again, thank you, I said. I was surprised at how quickly she backed down. Some of the others can be more difficult to kind of deal with, shall we say. But my private health concerns, the fact that, okay, I've said it on social media, but that doesn't mean that there's any obligation on my part to declare it to anyone at any time. I haven't made any concession by discussing my health situation on social media. That's my right. But it's no obligation on my part. I don't have to do any of these videos. I don't have to tell anybody why I'm not wearing a mask. Moncrief's article goes on, and there are comments from all of his groupies below in which they're all saying, people have got violent about being approached for not wearing a mask, and people have done this and done all these heinous things, apparently. If we look back at the history of forcing people to cover their faces, it could have a serious psychological effect on people to be required to do that. I know I wouldn't want to do it. I know I haven't. At no stage have I broken the law by not wearing a mask, including on public transport, including in shops, including in banks. I'm actually not breaking the law. And as I said, before Christmas, somebody called the Gardaí on me in that supermarket for not wearing a mask. And when the Gardaí came down, it was confirmed that I had permission not to wear a mask, and that this person had been told 3 times before he called the Gardaí that I had permission not to wear a mask, and he called them anyway. So he's now being looked at by the Gardaí for wasting their time maliciously. You don't get that in the Irish Times, do you? There's a good video by Thomas Sheridan, which he put up yesterday. I've linked in the description below. And he's talking about a number of things. But what I would say is that we are in a situation of psychic attack. Of course, all the maskers will be saying, oh, your tinfoil hat, and, you're exaggerating. And why don't you just wear a mask? Why are you so selfish not to wear a mask? Thomas Sheridan touches off the issue of the mainstream media. That for me has, as of last year, or certainly as of 2019, and indeed more so last year, been my primary bête noire is the mainstream media. I decided after the general election in Ireland of early 2020 that the issue of politics is less important to me than the issue of the mainstream media. This is vindicated by that article in the Irish Times today by Sean Moncrief. I do believe that there will be a reckoning for the Irish Times for the way that they've behaved overall, with their gaslighting, with their race baiting, with their lies, with their omissions. What Moncrief is doing is classic mainstream journalism omission. So he omits in his article to mention the fact that there are people who have legitimate reasons for not wearing a mask. Secondly, and this has now been well established in Ireland, that there's no burden of proof on you. You don't have to show medical history. Nobody has the right to demand your medical history. So you have to be taken at your word. Thirdly, Moncrief does not mention the fact that any of the prosecutions that are claimed by his rag, the Irish Times and RTE, to be anti-mask prosecutions and convictions are actually concomitant convictions for things like public order, refusing to identify to a Garda, and the not wearing a mask was simply incidental to it. What Moncrief does not put in his article of today is the fact that to date nobody in Ireland has, to my knowledge, and I've been looking into it carefully, nobody in Ireland to date has been prosecuted simply for not wearing a mask. As I said, the Gardaí came down to the shops where I was not wearing a mask. They confirmed I had permission to be on the premises without a mask. End of story. That's not getting in the Irish Times or an RTE, is it? Last night's Late Late Show was touted by RTE as being a fun show, to get us around the doom and gloom. People are putting bets on Twitter on how many seconds it would take Tubridy to start in some way invoking COVID-19. I didn't follow that particular one because I don't watch the Late Late Show. I never watched the Late Late Show. I never even watched it particularly when Gay was presenting it, but Gay was good. Gay had his, had his merits. He wasn't the best TV presenter in the world. He was no Terry Wogan, but he wasn't bad, and Gay was courageous, and Gay set his own agenda. But one of the things that Gay also did was he never told people in advance what was going to be on the show. So that led to the thrill of what you're going to get in the Late Late Show. A lot of it was diabolical. A lot of it was very shoddy, but there were some gems on the Late Late Show. And these gems were exposed by Gay's courage in his capacity as the producer of the Late Late Show, and indeed of his own radio show. Gay absolutely insisted on setting his own agenda. Gay Byrne lost all his money. Twice. The first time is bad luck, the second time's a sucker. The first time he was diddled out of his money legally by Russell Murphy, who's the grandfather of the present member of the Dáil, Owen Murphy. They're not telling you that, are they? The acorn doesn't fall far from the oak. But Russell Murphy diddled a lot of people out of their money in the 80s by being a financial advisor or financial manager for people. And when people then discovered that Murphy had stolen all their money, I use the term stolen unlawfully, actually. He didn't steal anything because they had signed in their contracts the right to Murphy to sign cheques on their behalf. Moral. And I'm coming from a working class background here, not that bourgeois, respectable background Gay came from. Working class people like our family will tell you the following. The one person to trust with your money is yourself. Who else should you trust with your money? Easy. Nobody. Stick by that and you won't go wrong. Gay lost his money twice. And again, this isn't really trickling into the mainstream media, partially because of people's posthumous respect for Gay. Okay, it's an Irish thing, and it's a benign thing in this country. They don't want to really go for the jugular here. But the fact of the matter is, and Thomas talks about the Jungian need to look at the dark side of ourselves in the shadow. Part of the shadow in Ireland is that we have a respectable class here who are enthralled to people in suits. They are almost parallel with Fine Gael voters. Gay lost his money because he was enthralled by a slick, sharp-tongued hustler psychopath like Russell Murphy. Many other people did, and if you examine all of the people who lost their money to Russell Murphy, they are all of identical type. A plumber who makes money, who came, shall we say, from the flats, and who then trains as a plumber, has ability and talent, makes money, starts building houses. A plasterer in this case, actually. My grandfather and my uncle, my father's older brother, made a lot of money. Particularly my father's older brother made big bucks. And they were from the slums. And they trained as plasterers, and then my father's older brother particularly got into the big scale construction thing and made an awful lot of money. They understood that you don't trust anyone else with your money. That's a working class thing. That's working class. Class is a more fluid thing than people recognise, because I would consider myself 1,000 times more working class than I would ever consider myself middle class. I know that's going to evoke gales of laughter, but it's just so happened that I was lucky enough to get a good education. Okay, I'm educated working class perhaps, but and I grew up in Howth, which is not exactly known for being a ghetto, but having said that, you don't lose your roots, and I wouldn't want to. Because I would rather be working class a million times than of the social class that Russell Murphy preyed upon so successfully. Another working class thing is to read the small print. Murphy had in all those contracts with Gay Byrne and all those ones, in the small print was the unfettered right on the part of Murphy to do what he liked with their money. So when it all blew up, there was no recourse. I believe that if Murphy had approached anybody and they'd said, okay, let's look at the contract, let's read through this. Oh dear, Russell, you've the right now there in that contract to sign any cheque on my behalf without consulting me. You've a unilateral right, all on your own, to sign cheques on my behalf. No, Russell, we're not going to do this. Let's revise the contract slightly. I believe Murphy would have walked away from them. In fact, I know he would have. know he would have. So we're getting back to another thing that has been a recurring theme of mine, that you never give a sucker an even break. That is the Irish government in a nutshell. And that's the social class that the Irish government are. Owen Murphy and those particular kind of people. They're from Russell Murphy's ilk. Smooth talking, wearing suits. They're not even well spoken. I'm better spoken than they are. But, look at Simon Harris or Owen Murphy. It's exciting. We're going to make people live in tenements where they have to share kitchens. But it's very exciting. Yes, okay. Part of the cult is calling politicians by their first name. That is diminishing. It's not like last year. And we're also seeing comments on that monster Tony Holohan's Twitter, in which people are saying, tell us all about your involvement in the cervical cancer thing. That's not going away. I think a distinction between myself and certain other social media commentators is that I'm optimistic. I am very optimistic because you look at where the psychopaths ran rampage previously over world history. It really only happened in writ large after the Industrial Revolution, when, first of all, we developed larger militaries and communications, including railways, steam transport, telegraph, became prevalent. So when you look at older societies prior to 1800, means of communication, means of travelling around were much more limited. One of the first big psychopathic adventures was the Great War. The second one was World War II. And the third one is what we're in now. But they were different. The First World War, the Great War, was the last of the great kind of imperial wars. They started it with cavalry, when you think about that one. The Second World War was a war of attrition in which civilian populations were targeted primarily through air raids. And the Second World War very nearly got very hairy at the end when the nuclear bombs started falling in Japan. And that brought home, even to the crudest of psychopaths, the fact that they needed to kind of curtail themselves a little bit, because that was the first time that there was a genuine risk to the continuation of organised civilization, and therefore to the continuation of the psychopathic control grid on which they all rely. So through their own escalation in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that was having the effect, potentially, of breaking the matrix. So when the Second World War ended, there has been an equilibrium between then and 2020. And that ended in 2020 with COVID-19. It ended. People don't realise that, but it ended. The Third World War is a global war against civilian populations. It doesn't involve tanks in the streets, no nuclear bombs have been dropped. It involves a psychic attack. So far it's worked quite effectively, but not as effectively as they necessarily would have wanted. Another issue is that the globalists don't take into consideration, if they did, they wouldn't be globalist psychopaths, they don't take into consideration the different cultures of the different countries they approach. So, for example, if you look at England, there's this, there's this cultic thing about the NHS, but also about the royal family. People don't realise that the Irish Republican movement was motivated not by a desire to break away from England, half as much as it was motivated by a desire to get away from the British Crown. So Fine Gael created the Irish Free State in 1922, which had symbolism of the British Crown here. Although it used the harp as the state symbol, technically it was a British Dominion. It was Fianna Fáil who got out of that in 1936. And in our Constitution of 1936, they stated that we were a democratic republic. Not very Fine Gael-y, that one, is it? Look at Fine Gael's background, actually. And look at how Fine Gael experimented in the 1930s with fascism. So Fine Gael are not Republicans, and they're not in favour of a free society. The gaslight, I've mentioned it many times before, that we're being made endure at the moment is the notion that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are identical. They're not. At least culturally, and their heritage is not identical. What is happening at the moment is a travesty. The notion of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael being in government. And it's all because one little weak Corkman wants to be Taoiseach. I have digressed. What happened with the psychopaths? The other great psychopathic project was communism. What happened with the psychopaths? Fascism, Hitler, communism under Stalin. It was Stalin who really took it to psychopathic lengths, but Lenin wasn't a saint either, neither was Trotsky. They were all psychopaths. But what happened to communism in Europe and what happened to fascism in Europe is that they failed. And this is why the outlook for us in the long term is a good one. Because what's happening now will fail. One of the things that's not being mentioned, one of the reasons why I predict it'll fail, is because the culture of the different countries that they brought under attack is considerably different. So, for example, the relationship, a lot of the people on the left and a lot of the working class people, I'm sure, will disagree with me when I say this, but the relationship with the Gardaí and the ordinary average Joe citizen in Ireland is quite distinct from that even in England, or particularly, say, Spain. What I have deducted personally from my interactions with the Gardaí is that they don't want trouble. Whereas you look at videos from England and other countries, and the police are on a power trip. The guards aren't here, from what I can see. I would love to see videos that would contradict me. Please show me videos that contradict me. I've gone for hours searching for videos of the Gardaí behaving in a tyrannical way in relation to COVID-19. And I haven't seen one. Now, there's Gemma O'Doherty berating a hapless female Garda sergeant on the quays. There's Gemma O'Doherty, going against a young Garda out, I think, somewhere in South Dublin. Gemma O'Doherty is rather like the mentally afflicted cousin in Dancing at Luna. So Rose will always be Rose, and Gemma O'Doherty will always be Gemma O'Doherty. But frankly, if Gemma O'Doherty's carry on is going to push anybody over the limit to the point where they would take their lives, then I would tactfully say that maybe policing wasn't the optimal career for them. Also, we get abuse on social media, which is why I don't allow comments at the moment on my YouTube, because I was just getting bored with it. I'm not monetized. I just put this up for the crack, really, I suppose. But, I don't need to take it. There's one individual at the end, a particularly sad individual, and I suppose it was the mark of my induction into the Irish alt scene when even all the freetards were messaging me in private to say, you've been trolled by the end, welcome to the club. It's like being in detention in school. You go into detention, then all your friends are there. Hey! I'm thinking of Sean Moncrief's article today, and I'm thinking of the comments, the particularly sad comments that follow it on Twitter. And they are the goody two-shoes NPCs in school who are jealous of the bad boys. That's what it is. They're jealous of the bad boys. They see those of us who turned around and said no to wearing a mask. They're jealous of us because they see us as making a fool of them. That's right, we are. I was talking to a woman in the shops 2 days ago. I go nearly every day because, we got to get milk and just top up with things. And she said, I haven't been out shopping for ages. She said, I hate wearing this mask. Take it off. I said, she said, but you have to wear a mask. I said, so what's my excuse? She said, I don't know. Well, then I said, you're not asking me, I said, in fairness to yourself, but I said, if I'm able to come in here and do my shopping and not wear a mask, why can't you? Well, she said, I said, you just don't want to get into trouble. Well, that's it, isn't it? Well, I said, let's rephrase all of this. You, as an adult woman, are choosing to wear a mask. All right. I said, how about that? Okay, she said, I'm choosing to wear a mask. Good. I said, so that's your right to wear a mask, in much the same way that it's my right not to. I said, but don't be telling yourself that you have to wear a mask. You don't have to wear a mask. But there you go. There's that test that they put up, that psychic test with the mask thing. You look at the statutory instrument, you can claim an exemption for difficulty breathing or for extreme distress. It doesn't require you to prove it. And then you look at the government guidelines and it says that people should not approach others who are not wearing a mask. Why did the government put that up? Do you think they're on your side? Do you think they're your friends? No, they put that up to stop people taking an action against the state. Never give a sucker an even break, right? So what happens is if you're harassed in a shop and the management of the shop take the side with the person who's harassing you, they could be leaving themselves open to trouble. And the state ain't going to come in and help them. Never give a sucker an even break. This is what I was getting back to. Yes. Thomas is talking about RTE, and he's talking about the Late Late Show. I had a change that happened to me between really 2007 and 2012. I stopped being a normie. I'm sure I probably wasn't that much of a normie anyway, but I had not realised that the system is crooked, and I had not realised a very important fundamental thing, that you have to fight for your rights. You should not expect the Gardaí, the politicians, the media to stand up for your rights. They won't. They'll trample on them if they think they can. Between 2008 and 2012, I realised, and I don't want to sound like the worst barroom bore here, an armchair lawyer. By 2012, I'd realised that something was coming. And I realised that it was in my interests to get out. Now, Thomas talks about being in the system, not of the system. That's right. We still have to feed ourselves. We still have to clothe ourselves. We still have to have a roof over our heads. Absolutely. And that's why you should be in the system. The free man on the land, for example, are not in the system. Well, they are actually in the system. They just think they're not. It's a delusion. But I had to teach myself how to represent myself in court. I had to teach myself a lot of other things. I had to learn how to read law. And any senior counsel, in Britain they call them Queen's Counsel, will tell you the next thing. The relevance of a law isn't just what it includes, but also what it excludes. So as I said, the statutory instrument regarding masks excludes a burden of proof on any person who's not wearing one. There you go. And then the government says, don't be approaching people who don't have masks. That's not altruism. That's not the government being nice. That's them wanting to avoid an action against the state. That's what that's about. I realised that I had to cut all my liabilities, and I realised that in 2012. And I did. And I'm on the dole since 2012. And I'm living with two parents. I have a roof over my head, plenty to eat. And I'm lucky. But I'm lucky for a specific reason, because I have no liabilities. March of last year, I was talking to an individual who owns a small business not far from me. A shop, a retail. She has a retail premises. I said to her last March, get out. Oh, but you know, it won't be that long. It will be that long. I said, get out. Sell, get out. Sack your staff, I said, get out. Well, she said, the landlord is demanding the lease. Well, I said, you can tell the landlord what to do. Well, she said, you know, he's saying this. That I said, is the landlord going to have another tenant who'll replace you? I said, yes or no? Well, I don't know, she said. Well, here we are now 11 months later. Is the landlord going to have another tenant to replace her? Well, and what she should have done last March was what I did in 2012 and say, I'm out of here, I'm cutting my losses, you're dealing with me on my terms. Easy. If she turned around to the landlord and said, I'm reneging on that lease. Now, we can do a new lease, starting immediately. We can rescind the old lease, I'll resign from that, and we'll do the new lease at 10% of what the old one was. The landlord probably would have said no, but may have settled for 25%. But if she had done that then and shut up shop, the landlord would settle for 10% now. Reopen. Have a new name, have a new company. Reopen. Never give a sucker an even break, and I'm not disparaging that person, by the way. I noticed something else. A particular large chain in Ireland announced last week, and this was like what Thomas says, this was like Simon Coveney's junket to Turkey to bring in 15,000 Syrian immigrants to Ireland, breaking all the COVID-19 laws. And of course the mainstream media said, well, we did mention it really, sure, we didn't cover it up. that way. They did cover it up because they didn't give it the prominence that they give other things. So it's not just about including things, it's about balance. What gets the headline news? What gets the first mention on the RTE news? That's what they want you to hear. And if they're telling you something, that means they're doing something else that you're not aware of. If a politician holds up his right hand, you need to look at his left. A major chain in Ireland has announced that it is closing its flagship branch, no less. It's closing its flagship branch in central Dublin. And it's in discussions about its permanent staff. I met somebody from that major Irish chain last year, and I said to her, you need to do something here. You need to get all your redundancy from that company and cash in your pension with them. Well, she said, you know, I like working for them. Well, you won't be working for them 2 years from now, one way or another. I said, but you have specific skills that you can take to many, many other workplaces. Get the capital out of that company now. Get your full redundancy from them now. And cash in your pension. She didn't listen. I would have said that to people who are working for British Home Stores, BHS. Get out, get all your redundancy and get your pension. And do it now. No. And look what happened to BHS, where Philip Green stole the whole pension scheme and got away with it. Got away with it, he did. The way these ones always do. Like Tony Holohan got away with bullying and lying about women suffering from cervical cancer. Never give a sucker an even break. So I made up my mind at the general election in 2020, the Irish general election of February 2020. I made up my mind. Oh, on as an aside, by the way, Sean Moncrief's article includes Orange Man Bad. It has to. It's almost compulsory that they have to include Orange Man Bad somewhere. Anyway, after the general election in Ireland of February 2020, when Fine Gael managed to get 35 of them back in, I threw overboard any residual altruism that I might have had, and I said, each to himself now. I'm now looking out for number one, with the honourable exception of my mother and father. I am now looking out for number one. Oh yes, I was right. But my hobby since then, since February 2020, has been to focus on the mainstream media and how irredeemably crooked they are. Irredeemably crooked. I don't recall a time in Ireland when our mainstream media, by which I really mean RTE and the Irish Times, were as crooked and bent as they are now. That's not to suggest that in what we look back on as the halcyon days of the 1980s, they were particularly glittering. They weren't. You know, RTE had a very, very big smattering of mediocrity, and one of the problems for RTE today now is that 45 years of nepotism is now coming home to roost for them. Because you have all of these talentless souls in there, like Ryan Tubridy and, you know, all these other ones, who all got in through family connections. So now that things have got difficult and people are getting angry with RTE, these ones do not have the talent or wherewithal or courage or bravery to address it properly. So what they're doing is they're doubling down. That's what psychopaths always do. It's what Hitler did at the end of the Second World War. He doubled down. What was wicked and immoral about what Hitler did was, in the final days, when he knew or should have known he was defeated, he enlisted old men and teenage boys to go onto the front line. There's a particular evil of that. But then, they're psychopaths. And you must always remember this. There's no depths to which psychopaths will not stoop. I always found that thing of the old men and the boys in the final days of the Third Reich going to the front line, it upset me hugely, and it still does. It upset me hugely. But the argument could be raised, they could have said no. Because Hitler was defeated by then, it was falling apart. The German Reich was falling apart. The Nazis had lost their confidence. They lost it after Stalingrad. Stalingrad was the end. Although, frankly, Operation Barbarossa was the end, because they just, they attacked this big sponge, the Soviet Union. They went at wintertime. Yeah, that was clever. Or no, I think they went in summertime, so that when they got bogged down, the Russian winter set in. Nobody's beaten the Russian winter. Genghis Khan did because he came from the east. Nobody's beaten the Russians from the west. They never have and they never will. Russia's too big. It's a sponge. It soaks them up. And the Soviet Union, Belarus particularly, Ukraine and Russia suffered terribly as a result of the Nazi invasion, but they weren't defeated. Stalingrad never fell. Leningrad never fell. So they will be defeated. And I am optimistic. But you have to box clever. You have to box clever. D. Wall, who's a guard plant anyway, and all these Andy Heath and all these ones who are going around, with their notices and their bits and pieces. They are collateral in all of this. And you have to look around and make sure that you're not collateral in all of this.